Hunters mock the love between a bear and a human baby. What this baby did next left everyone in tears. Let us know where you're watching from. The small cabin sat nestled against the edge of Whispering Pines Forest, its weathered wooden walls telling stories of countless seasons. On the porch, little Emma Sullivan, barely 10 months old, sat on a handmade quilt, her chubby fingers reaching toward the massive figure approaching from the tree line. The mother bear, whom the locals had named Willow, moved with surprising gentleness for her enormous size. Her thick brown coat caught the morning sunlight as she ambled toward the cabin, carrying something delicately in her mouth. Behind her, 2 cubs tumbled and played, stopping occasionally to watch their mother's strange ritual. "She's back again," whispered Rose Sullivan from behind the screen door, her hand clutching her husband's arm. "4th time this week." Thomas Sullivan nodded silently, his hunter's instincts warring with his amazement. When they'd first spotted the bear approaching their baby 2 months ago, he'd nearly fired his rifle. But something stopped him. The way Willow had carefully placed a perfectly ripe raspberry next to Emma, then backed away, watching as the baby examined her gift. Now, Willow was a regular visitor, and Emma squealed with delight whenever the bear appeared. Today, the bear gently dropped a pine cone in front of the baby, who babbled happily and patted Willow's nose without a trace of fear. "The rangers say they've never seen anything like it," Thomas murmured. "They think maybe Willow lost a cub last season before these 2 were born. Say, sometimes maternal instincts can transfer in strange ways." Rose nodded, her eyes never leaving her daughter. "Emma was born the same week they found that poached bear cub. Remember how she cried for days after, even though nothing was wrong? I sometimes wonder if they somehow felt each other." Outside, Emma giggled as Willow's warm breath tickled her hair. The bear sat protectively beside the child, occasionally glancing toward the forest as if watching for danger. Her own cubs had grown accustomed to these visits, and now cautiously approached the porch, curious about the strange, hairless cub their mother seemed to adore. The scene was one of impossible tenderness, a massive predator and a helpless child, connected by something deeper than understanding. None of them noticed the group of men watching from the shadows of the pines, their eyes narrowed with judgment and disbelief, rifles gleaming in the dappled forest light. The hunting party had come to Whispering Pines following rumors of easy game. 5 men with expensive gear and city accents, led by Mason Reed, a local guide known for his ruthless efficiency. They had not expected to find a mother bear playing nursemaid to a human child. "You've got to be kidding me," sneered Victor, the youngest of the group, lowering his binoculars. "Is this some kind of joke, Reed? A circus act?" Mason shook his head, his weathered face unreadable. "No circus. The Sullivans have lived here for generations. That's their baby girl. And they just let a wild bear babysit?" Laughter rippled through the group as they watched Willow gently nudge one of her cubs toward Emma. The baby reached out with fearless curiosity as the cub sniffed her hand. "They've lost their minds," declared Harrison, the group's self-appointed leader. "That bear should be mounted on someone's wall, not playing with a kid. One swipe of those claws would tear that baby to ribbons." "Probably feeding it treats made it tame," another hunter suggested. "Dangerous game they're playing." Mason shifted uncomfortably. "The rangers have been monitoring the situation. The bear hasn't shown any aggression." "Yet," Harrison added with a smirk, "nature always wins in the end. You can't turn a killer into a nanny." The men emerged from the tree line, making no effort to conceal their approach. Thomas Sullivan straightened when he spotted them, positioning himself closer to the door, ready to grab Emma if needed. But Willow showed no signs of aggression. only a watchful alertness as she positioned herself more fully between the approaching hunters and the baby. "Sullivan," Mason called out in greeting, though his companion's mocking smiles belied any friendliness. "Quite the pet you've got there." Thomas nodded stiffly. "Reed, she's not a pet." "Could have fooled me," Harrison laughed, stepping forward. "What kind of man lets his kid play with a wild animal? You training her for the circus?" The other hunters chuckled, their eyes roving between the bear and the baby with a mixture of disbelief and contempt. "That's the craziest thing I've ever seen," Victor declared, raising his phone to take a photo. "Nobody back home is going to believe this." Emma, oblivious to the tension, continued to play with the pine cone Willow had brought her. The bear's eyes never left the hunters, her massive body completely still except for her breathing. "You know what happens to people who treat wild animals like pets?" Harrison asked, taking another step closer. "They end up as cautionary tales. One day that thing will remember what it really is." Rose appeared in the doorway, her face tight with worry. "Thomas." But before Thomas could respond, Emma did something that silenced everyone. Looking up at the tension in the adults' faces, sensing something was wrong, the baby turned to Willow and wrapped her tiny arms around the bear's massive paw, clinging to it as if for protection. Not from the bear, but from the men with their harsh voices and cold eyes. The hunters' laughter died in their throats as they watched the baby seek comfort from the bear. Willow remained perfectly still, allowing Emma to hold her paw, her dark eyes fixed on the men. "Well, isn't that touching?" Harrison finally broke the silence, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "The kid doesn't even know enough to be scared." Thomas took a step forward. "I think you boys should move along now. There's plenty of forest to hunt in without disturbing my family." "Family?" Victor snorted. "Is the bear included in that?" Rose stepped fully onto the porch now, her voice steady despite her fear. "She's never hurt anyone. The Rangers have been studying their relationship. They think it's some kind of cross-species bonding phenomenon." "Cross-species nonsense," Harrison retorted. "That's a wild animal, ma'am, not a golden retriever. One day you'll turn your back, and—" He made a slashing motion with his hand. As if understanding his gesture, Willow made a low sound in her throat, not quite a growl, but a warning. Her cubs immediately retreated behind her massive form. "See that?" Harrison pointed triumphantly, showing its true nature already. "She's protecting the cubs," Thomas countered. "Any mother would." Harrison's eyes narrowed. "Including from your kid. You wait and see." "I've had enough of this," Thomas said firmly. "You're trespassing on private property now. Time for you to leave." The hunters exchanged glances, and Mason shifted uncomfortably. "Come on, boys. Plenty of legal game elsewhere." But Harrison wasn't finished. He took another step toward the porch, deliberately testing Willow's patience. The bear rose slowly to her full height, towering over everyone present, her eyes never leaving Harrison's face. "Big, isn't she?" Harrison commented, his hand casually drifting toward his rifle. "Would make a fine trophy." "Don't," Thomas warned, his own hand moving toward the door where his shotgun leaned. Emma, sensing the growing tension, began to whimper. She looked between her parents' worried faces and the strangers with their hard eyes and cruel smiles. Her tiny hands clutched Willow's fur more tightly. "Look at that," Victor laughed. "The kid thinks the bear's going to save her from us. Doesn't even know which is the real monster." Harrison nodded. "Let's show her, shall we?" A little lesson in natural order. In one fluid motion he raised his rifle, not pointing it directly at Willow, but close enough to make his intention clear. The bear didn't move, but her eyes tracked the weapon, and a deep rumble vibrated through her chest. "Put that down," Thomas commanded, his voice deadly serious now. "You point a gun at that bear, you're pointing it at my child." Harrison smirked. "Just making a point, Sullivan. The bear might play nice now, but instinct always wins. One day it'll turn on you, on your kid. I'd be doing you a favor, taking it out now." What happened next stunned everyone into silence. Emma, her face scrunched with distress, suddenly pushed herself to her feet. She'd been attempting to stand independently for weeks without success, but now, with trembling determination, the baby took her very first steps, not toward her mother or father, but toward Willow. 3 wobbly, determined steps before falling against the bear's soft fur, her tiny hands burying themselves in Willow's coat as she began to cry. Not the ordinary tears of a fussy baby, but deep, wrenching sobs that seemed to come from her very soul. The forest fell silent except for Emma's heartbreaking cries. Even the birds seemed to hold their breath as the baby clung to Willow, her tiny body shaking with sobs. Willow, with a gentleness that defied her massive size, lowered herself back down and curled protectively around Emma. She made a soft huffing sound, almost like a mother's soothing whisper, and nudged the baby with her nose. The bear's cubs crept closer, confused by the human baby's distress, their own small bodies pressing against their mother's side. It was a tableau that none of the hunters had ever witnessed, a family circle that transcended species, bound by something none of them could name. Harrison's rifle barrel dipped slightly, uncertainty flickering across his face. "Did you see that?" Rose whispered, tears streaming down her face. "She walked. Her first steps." Thomas nodded, his own eyes glistening. She chose who she felt safest with. "This is ridiculous," Harrison muttered, but his voice had lost its edge. "The kid's too young to know better." "Or maybe she's too young to have learned our prejudices," Thomas replied quietly. "Maybe she still sees with her heart instead of her fears." Victor lowered his phone, the mocking smile gone from his face. "The bear really isn't hurting her." "Of course not," Rose said. "Willow has been visiting Emma since she was 7 months old. She's brought her little gifts, berries, interesting leaves, smooth stones. She watches over her when Emma naps on the porch on warm days." As if to demonstrate, Emma's sobs began to quiet as Willow continued to huff softly against her hair. The baby's tiny hand patted the bear's muzzle in a gesture so tender it could break hearts. She walked to the bear instead of her parents, one of the other hunters observed, his voice hushed with something like awe. When she felt threatened, she chose the bear. Harrison's jaw tightened. "That's not natural." "Isn't it?" Thomas challenged. "What's more natural than seeking safety when you're afraid? Emma knows who makes her feel protected." Mason, who had remained silent through much of the confrontation, finally spoke. "I've been guiding in these woods for 30 years, seen bears take down elk, seen them tear apart campsites looking for food. Never seen anything like this." Harrison scoffed, but it sounded hollow now. "It'll turn on her eventually. That's what wild animals do." "Is it?" Rose asked softly. "Or is that what we tell ourselves to justify our fear of what we don't understand?" Emma had stopped crying now. In the sudden quiet, she pulled back from Willow's fur and looked up at the massive bear with complete trust in her eyes. Then, with the simple confidence of a child who knows nothing of impossibility, she pressed her tiny forehead against Willow's large one in a gesture of such profound connection that it seemed to hang in the air like a question none of them could answer. One of Willow's cubs cautiously approached, sniffing curiously at Emma's feet. The baby giggled through her tears, reaching down to touch the cub's ear with gentle fingers. Victor swallowed hard, lowering his phone completely. I don't think I can explain what I'm seeing here. There's nothing to explain, Harrison insisted, but his voice wavered. It's just unnatural. No, Thomas said firmly. What's unnatural is looking at something beautiful and seeing only danger. What's unnatural is teaching children to fear instead of understand. The silence stretched as Emma continued to interact with Willow and her cubs, her tears forgotten in the joy of their company. The baby's laughter rang through the clearing as one of the cubs playfully rolled a pine cone toward her. Harrison watched, his knuckles white around his rifle, conflicting emotions battling across his face. Finally, with a muttered curse, he lowered the weapon completely. "This doesn't make any sense," he said, but the anger had drained from his voice, replaced by confused wonder. "Some things aren't meant to be understood," Rose replied gently, "only witnessed." Victor stepped forward slowly, his eyes fixed on the unlikely family before him. May I come closer?" Thomas hesitated, then nodded, watching carefully as the young hunter approached the porch. Willow tensed slightly but made no aggressive move as Victor crouched a respectful distance away. Emma looked up at the newcomer, her face still damp with tears. For a moment she studied him with solemn eyes, then did something none of them expected. She picked up the pine cone Willow had brought her and held it out toward Victor, an offering, a bridge between worlds. "She wants you to take it," Rose explained softly. With trembling fingers, Victor accepted the pine cone, turning it over in his hands as if it were made of gold. "Thank you," he whispered to the baby, his voice thick with emotion. Emma smiled, then turned back to Willow, patting the bear's nose affectionately. The trust between them was absolute, unquestioning, the kind that exists before the world teaches us who to fear and why. Harrison shook his head, but something had changed in his expression. "I've been hunting for 30 years, never seen anything like this." "Maybe that's because you've never looked for it," Thomas suggested. "Maybe there's more in these woods than trophies to hang on a wall." Mason stepped forward, removing his hat. "Thomas, Rose, I apologize for bringing these men here. I didn't know—" "It's all right," Thomas interrupted. "Maybe they were meant to see this. Maybe we all were." One by one, the hunters lowered their rifles, their faces softened by something they couldn't quite name. Even Harrison, the most hardened among them, seemed unable to look away from the scene on the porch. A baby human and a mother bear, finding in each other something the rest of the world had forgotten how to see. "What will happen to them?" Victor asked quietly. "To Emma and Willow, you called her?" Rose smiled. "They'll grow together, I suppose. Emma will get older, learn to speak, to understand the world differently. Willow's cubs will grow too. Maybe one day their paths will naturally separate. Or maybe they won't," Thomas added. "Maybe they'll remind us that the boundaries we create are often just that. Created, not innate." As if understanding she was being discussed, Willow looked up, her intelligent eyes moving from face to face. There was no aggression in her gaze, no fear, only a watchful awareness, an assessment of potential threats to the small human who had somehow become part of her family. Harrison finally slung his rifle over his shoulder with a sigh of surrender. "I still say it's not natural," he muttered, but the conviction had left his voice. "Perhaps," Thomas replied, "we need to reconsider what natural really means." The sun began to sink toward the horizon, painting the forest in shades of gold and amber. The hunters had stayed longer than anyone expected, watching in fascinated silence as Emma and Willow continued their impossible friendship. They had witnessed Emma feeding the bear cubs tiny bits of apple, giggling as their soft mouths tickled her palms. They had seen Willow gently correct her cubs when their play grew too rough near the baby. Most incredibly, they had watched Emma fall asleep against Willow's warm side, the bear's massive body curled protectively around her tiny form. "The Rangers have documented everything," Rose explained quietly as Emma napped. "They believe it might be the only case of cross-species adoption involving a bear and human child ever recorded." "Adoption?" Harrison questioned, the word catching in his throat. Thomas nodded. "That's what they're calling it. Willow treats Emma as if she were one of her cubs, brings her food, teaches her things, protects her." "And you just allow this?" Mason asked, still struggling to reconcile what he was seeing. "We didn't allow anything," Rose said. "It simply happened. We could have scared Willow away, shot her even, but instead we watched, we listened, we learned." Victor, who had been silent for some time, suddenly spoke. "My grandfather used to tell stories, legends from the old people about children raised by wolves, bears teaching humans the secrets of healing plants. I always thought they were just myths." "Perhaps," Thomas suggested, "some myths have roots in forgotten truths." As the light faded, Willow gently nosed Emma awake. The baby stirred, rubbing her eyes with tiny fists, then smiled up at the bear with complete recognition and trust. Willow huffed softly, then rose to her full height, gathering her cubs with a gentle motion. It was time for them to return to the forest for the night. Emma didn't cry or reach after them as they prepared to leave. Instead, she waved a chubby hand in what looked remarkably like a goodbye gesture. Willow paused at the edge of the clearing, looking back at the porch one last time before disappearing into the trees, her cubs following close behind. The hunters watched them go, a profound silence settling over the group. "She'll be back tomorrow?" Victor asked finally. Rose nodded. "Usually around the same time, unless it's raining heavily." Harrison cleared his throat. "I've been hunting these woods since I was a boy," he said slowly. "Taken more bears than I can count. Always saw them as just targets, trophies." He paused, struggling with words that seemed unfamiliar on his tongue. "I never thought of them as capable of love," Rose suggested gently. Harrison nodded, unable to meet her eyes. Thomas stepped forward, his expression serious but not unkind. "There's different kinds of hunting, you know. Not all of them need guns." "What do you mean?" Victor asked. "The kind where you seek understanding instead of dominance," Thomas explained. "Where you hunt for knowledge instead of trophies." Mason put his hat back on, his weathered face thoughtful. "My father used to say that the greatest hunters were the ones who learned to see through the eyes of their prey. I never really understood what he meant until today." As the hunters prepared to leave, Harrison hesitated, then turned back to Thomas and Rose. "Your daughter," he said awkwardly, "she's special. What she did today." "Walked to a bear instead of away from it?" Thomas asked with a small smile. Harrison nodded. "No fear, just trust. I've never seen anything like it." "Children see the world differently," Rose said. "Before we teach them who to fear, what to hate, Emma still sees with her heart." "Maybe we could all learn something from that," Victor suggested quietly, as the hunting party disappeared down the forest path, their rifles no longer held at the ready but slung casually over shoulders. Thomas put his arm around Rose's waist. Together they looked down at Emma, who was playing contentedly with the pine cone Willow had brought her, examining it with focused curiosity. "Do you think they understood?" Rose asked softly. Thomas considered for a moment. I think they saw something today they won't soon forget. Whether they understand it yet, that may take time. And Willow? The rangers say they can't protect her if she wanders too far from our property. There are other hunters out there. Thomas gazed toward the darkening forest where their unusual friend had disappeared. I have a feeling those men might spread a different kind of story now. Not about a bear to be hunted, but about a bear who loves a human child. Some stories have power, Rose. They change how people see the world. Emma looked up at her parents, then toward the forest, a smile of complete contentment on her face. She had no words yet to express what she understood instinctively, that love recognizes no boundaries, that family is found in the most unexpected places, and that sometimes the greatest teachers have paws instead of hands. In her innocent wisdom, she had shown a group of hardened men that the world was larger, stranger, and more beautiful than they had ever imagined. And in doing so, she had protected Willow just as surely as Willow had protected her. As winter settled over Whispering Pines Forest, a heavy silence blanketed the Sullivan cabin. The porch, where Emma and Willow had spent countless hours, remained empty, covered in pristine snow. Inside, Emma would often press her tiny hands against the window, her eyes searching the tree line for any sign of her furry friend. "Bear?" she would ask, hopefully, each morning, her vocabulary growing daily, but always including the word she had learned first. Rose would gather her daughter close. "Willow is sleeping, remember? Bears sleep during the cold months. She'll come back when the flowers do." Emma seemed to understand, nodding solemnly before returning to her toys. Pine cones, smooth stones, and dried berries that Willow had brought her. Treasures she refused to part with. The story of Emma and Willow had indeed spread, bringing both wonder and unwanted attention. News vans had parked at the edge of their property until Thomas had firmly but politely asked them to leave. Wildlife biologists had requested permission to study the relationship when spring returned. Most were respectful, fascinated by the unprecedented bond. But not everyone. 3 days before Christmas, Thomas returned from town with a troubled expression. He waited until Emma was napping before sharing the news with Rose. "There's a new hunting party in the area," he said quietly, "led by a man named Dominic Reeves. He's made it clear he doesn't believe our story. Or worse, he does and doesn't care." Rose's face paled. "He's looking for Willow." Thomas nodded grimly. "He's offering a bounty to whoever tracks her den. Says a bear that size would make a record trophy. But the protection order only covers our property and a 5-mile radius. If they find her denning beyond that..." Thomas didn't need to finish the sentence. That night, as snow fell heavily outside, Thomas made a decision. In the morning, he packed supplies, kissed Rose and Emma goodbye, and headed into the forest. "I need to find her first," he explained. "Make sure she's safe." "Be careful," Rose whispered, hugging him tightly. "They're already saying we're crazy for trusting a wild animal. If something happens to you..." "Nothing will happen," he promised. "Willow knows me." Emma watched from Rose's arms, her small face serious. "Dada find bear?" she asked. Thomas nodded, touching her cheek gently. "Dada find bear." The forest in winter was a different world, silent, stark, and unforgiving. Thomas followed game trails and the subtle signs only a lifetime woodsman would recognize. He had been tracking animals since childhood, but never with such urgency, never with such fear for the quarry. 3 days passed with no sign of Willow or her den. The snow had covered any tracks, and the forest kept its secrets well. On the 4th day, as Thomas prepared to make camp in a small hollow, he heard voices echoing through the trees. Silently, he moved toward the sound, his stomach nodding when he recognized Dominic Reeves's commanding tone. Through the trees, he spotted 5 men examining what appeared to be fresh claw marks on a tree trunk. "She's close," one of them said excitedly. "These marks are recent, testing the bark for insects, maybe." Dominic, a tall man with cold eyes, ran his gloved hand over the scoring. "Large bear, female, by the height of the marks, could be our target. The Sullivan bear," another added with a laugh. "Worth double if it's her." "That Sullivan man's a fool," Dominic replied, letting his kid play with a wild predator. "We'd be doing them a favor, taking it out before it mauls the child." Thomas felt his body tense with anger, but he remained hidden. There were 5 of them, all armed. He needed to find Willow first. When the hunting party moved on, Thomas examined the claw marks himself. They were indeed fresh, and he recognized the pattern, slightly wider on the right paw, where Willow had an old injury. His heart raced. She was close, and so were her pursuers. As darkness fell, a storm moved in, bringing driving snow and biting wind. Thomas pushed on, knowing the hunters would likely make camp. The storm could give him the advantage he needed. Near midnight, as he struggled through thigh-deep drifts, he spotted it. A dark opening beneath a rocky overhang, nearly hidden by fallen timber and snow. Fresh tracks, quickly being covered by new snow, led inside. Approaching cautiously, Thomas called softly, "Willow, it's me." A low, warning growl emerged from the darkness. "Willow," he said again, remaining still. "I'm not here to hurt you. You know me." The growling stopped. Slowly, a massive shape moved in the darkness, and Willow's face appeared at the entrance to the den. Her eyes gleamed in the dim light, assessing him. Thomas removed his glove and held out his hand, letting her catch his scent. "Emma misses you," he said softly. "Rose, too." At the mention of Emma's name, Willow huffed softly. She remembered. Behind her, Thomas could make out the shapes of her cubs, larger now, watching curiously from the back of the den. "There are men looking for you," Thomas explained, knowing she couldn't understand his words but hoping she sensed his concern. "Bad men, hunters." Willow's posture changed subtly, alertness replacing curiosity. Thomas made a quick decision. "You can't stay here, they'll find you." He backed away slowly, gesturing. "You need to come with me, back to our land." To his amazement, Willow emerged from the den, her cubs following hesitantly. She seemed to understand the urgency in his voice, the danger in the air. Together, the strange procession moved through the storm. A man leading a mother bear and her cubs through a blizzard, back toward safety. They had traveled less than a mile when Thomas heard voices carried on the wind. The hunting party was on the move despite the storm. Perhaps they had found the den already, realized it was recently abandoned. "This way," Thomas whispered urgently, leading Willow and her cubs into a dense thicket. They crouched together as flashlight beams cut through the swirling snow nearby. "Tracks lead this way," someone shouted over the wind. "Fresh ones." Thomas looked at Willow, her massive body sheltering her cubs, her intelligent eyes fixed on the lights. If the hunters came this way, if they found them. He had no illusions about what would happen. These men wouldn't listen to reason. They wouldn't care about the miracle of Emma and Willow's bond. They saw only a trophy, a conquest. In that moment, as snow fell around them and danger approached, Thomas realized the truth that had been forming in his heart since the first day he'd watched Willow approach his daughter with gentle curiosity. Some connections transcended understanding. Some bonds defied explanation. And sometimes protecting those bonds meant taking risks that others would call foolish. "Stay here," he whispered to Willow, touching her fur briefly. "I'll lead them away." Stepping out of the thicket, Thomas deliberately made noise, catching the hunter's attention. "Hey," he called into the storm, "looking for something?" The flashlight swung toward him. "Sullivan?" Dominic's voice carried through the snow. "What are you doing out here?" "Protecting my family," Thomas replied simply, then turned and ran, drawing the hunters away from where Willow and her cubs remained hidden. What followed was a desperate game of cat and mouse through the blizzard. Thomas knew these woods better than any visitor, using every trick he had learned in a lifetime of hunting to lead the men in circles, away from Willow, and eventually back toward the protected zone around his property. By dawn, exhausted and half frozen, he stumbled across the boundary line marked by the Forest Service signs. Behind him, the hunting party had given up hours ago, the storm too severe, the chase too difficult. Thomas collapsed against a tree, his body shaking with cold and fatigue. He had done it, led them away from Willow. But where was she now? Had she and her cubs returned to the den? Had they fled deeper into the wilderness? As the storm began to ease, he heard a sound that made him look up in disbelief. Willow emerged from the trees, her cubs trailing behind her. She had followed him, not his tracks, which the storm had erased, but some deeper understanding, some instinct that defied explanation. "You came," Thomas whispered, tears freezing on his cheeks. Willow approached, sniffing him with concern. She huffed softly, then did something extraordinary. She nudged him with her massive head, urging him to his feet, as she would one of her cubs. Together, they made their way through the last miles of forest, bear and man, supporting each other through the deep snow, until the Sullivan cabin came into view. On the porch, Rose stood with Emma in her arms, having seen them approaching. Her eyes widened in disbelief at the sight of Thomas emerging from the trees with Willow and her cubs beside him. "Thomas," she cried, running to meet them despite the snow. "What happened? How did you—" But her questions died as she took in her husband's exhausted state and the presence of the bears. Understanding dawned in her eyes. "They were hunting her," Thomas explained simply. "I couldn't leave her there." Emma squirmed in her mother's arms, reaching toward Willow with absolute joy. "Bear! Bear, back!" For the first time, Willow approached the cabin not with curious caution, but with the confidence of coming home. Her cubs, initially hesitant, followed their mother's lead, sniffing the strange structure and the humans who occupied it. "What now?" Rose asked, watching as Emma giggled with delight at the return of her unusual friend. "They can't go back. Not with those hunters still out there." Thomas looked at the bears, then at his family, and then at the Forest Service boundary markers visible through the trees. An idea began to form, one that would change all their lives forever. "No," he agreed, "they can't go back. But maybe they don't have to." Spring arrived early that year, as if nature itself was eager to witness what would unfold at the edge of Whispering Pines Forest. The Sullivan property had undergone a transformation during the winter months. A new, larger cabin stood beside the original one, with wide-covered porches and special reinforced areas designed specifically for Willow and her growing cubs. The protected zone had been expanded, thanks to Harrison's tireless advocacy and a petition signed by thousands, after a carefully edited video of Emma and Willow had gone viral. Their story had touched hearts around the world. The baby who had taken her first steps toward a bear, the father who had risked his life to save that bear, the family that had redefined what it meant to protect wildlife. Scientists from major universities had established a research station nearby, documenting every aspect of the unprecedented relationship. Conservation groups had raised funds to purchase surrounding land, creating a wildlife corridor that would remain forever wild. And at the center of it all, on this bright spring morning, 17-month-old Emma Sullivan sat on a porch swing beside her mother, watching as Willow taught her cubs to fish in the stream that ran through their property. "Fish?" Emma exclaimed, pointing excitedly as one of the cubs successfully caught a trout, only to drop it in surprise. Rose laughed, stroking her daughter's hair. "That's right, sweetheart. Willow is teaching them to fish." Thomas emerged from the new cabin, where he had been speaking with Dr. Eleanor Matthews, the lead researcher from the university. "Good news," he announced. "The Foundation approved our proposal. We're officially the Whispering Pines Wildlife Sanctuary." Rose squeezed his hand. "So it's real. We're really doing this." "We're really doing this," he confirmed. "Protecting Willow and her cubs, studying their behavior, using what we learned to help other bears, and maybe, just maybe, helping people understand that what they've always believed about wild animals isn't the whole truth." Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Harrison's truck. The former hunter had become a frequent visitor and an unexpected ally. He stepped out, followed by Victor, who now carried a camera instead of a rifle. "Morning, Sullivans," Harrison called. "Brought someone who wanted to meet the famous family." A slender woman with silver-streaked hair emerged from the passenger side, her eyes immediately finding Willow and her cubs by the stream. "Dr. Jane Goodall," Thomas breathed, recognizing the legendary primatologist and conservationist. She smiled warmly. "Mr. and Mrs. Sullivan, and this must be Emma." She knelt to the child's level. "I've heard so much about you and your special friend." Emma regarded her solemnly, then broke into a smile. "My bear," she said proudly. "Yes," Dr. Goodall agreed, "your bear, a most extraordinary relationship." The arrival of such a distinguished visitor drew Willow's attention. She left her cubs to their fishing lesson and ambled toward the porch, her movements relaxed and confident. She had grown accustomed to visitors over the winter, seeming to understand that these humans posed no threat to her family, neither her cubs nor her human companions. Dr. Goodall remained perfectly still as the massive bear approached, her face a mask of professional calm overlaid with genuine wonder. "Remarkable," she murmured as Willow stopped at the bottom of the porch steps, looking up at the gathering. "Completely at ease among humans." "Not all humans," Thomas corrected gently. "She knows who she can trust, and who she can't." Dominic Reeves and his hunting party had tried twice more during the winter to find a way onto the Sullivan property, claiming they had the right to remove a dangerous animal. Both times, they had been turned away by Forest Service rangers, Harrison, and a growing group of local supporters who had formed a protection network around the sanctuary. "The documentary team will be arriving next week," Dr. Matthews said, joining them on the porch. "National Geographic is very excited about telling your story." Rose looked uncertain. "As long as they understand this isn't a zoo. Willow isn't a pet. This is her home now, on her terms." "Of course," Dr. Goodall agreed. "That's precisely what makes this situation so extraordinary. It's not domestication, it's coexistence, mutual respect." As if to demonstrate this point, Emma wiggled down from her mother's lap and toddled to the porch steps. "Bear play?" she asked, looking at her parents for permission. It was a routine they had established. Emma never approached Willow without her parents' approval, a safety measure that even the most supportive researchers insisted upon. Thomas nodded. "Be gentle, remember?" Emma descended the steps carefully, approaching Willow with the confidence of complete trust. The bear lowered her massive head, allowing the tiny girl to pat her nose in greeting. "My bear," Emma said again, this time directly to Willow. From the stream, Willow's cubs watched curiously, still somewhat wary of humans despite their mother's example. They were growing quickly, their once tiny bodies now substantial, their playful antics occasionally testing the boundaries their mother established. Dr. Goodall watched the interaction with intense interest. "I've observed many interspecies relationships in my career, but this—" She shook her head in wonder. "This challenges everything we think we know about animal cognition and behavior." Harrison, who had been quietly observing from the side, spoke up. "It changed everything I thought I knew. Been hunting these woods for 30 years, never saw bears as anything but targets. Now, ... He gestured toward Emma and Willow. "Now I can't unsee this." A commotion from the direction of the stream drew everyone's attention. One of Willow's cubs had wandered too close to a deep pool and appeared to be struggling in the water. The other cub paced anxiously at the edge, making distressed noises. Before anyone could react, Willow was already moving, her powerful body covering the distance in seconds. But what happened next left even the experienced researchers speechless. Emma, seeing the cub in trouble, had started running toward the stream as well. "Emma, no!" Rose cried, fear strangling her voice. But instead of plunging into danger, the toddler stopped at the stream's edge, well away from the deep water, and began calling to the struggling cub in a high, encouraging voice, just as she had heard her own parents call to her when she was learning to walk. "Come! You come!" she called, patting the ground beside her. Willow reached her cub, helping it scramble onto the bank with a gentle nudge of her powerful head. Once safe, the young bear shook itself, then incredibly moved toward Emma, drawn by her calls. The adults watched in stunned silence as the bear cub approached the human child with cautious curiosity. When they were a few feet apart, both stopped, regarding each other with identical expressions of wonder. "My goodness," Dr. Goodall whispered. "They're mirroring each other's body language. Look at the posture, the head tilt." Slowly, with the deliberate care of a child who had been taught gentleness above all else, Emma extended her hand, palm up, as she had been shown to do with Willow. The cub sniffed the air, then took a tentative step forward. "This is unprecedented," Dr. Matthews murmured, frantically taking notes. The second generation accepting human contact without the mother's direct mediation. Rose clutched Thomas's hand tightly. "Should we stop this?" Thomas watched his daughter and the bear cub with a mixture of fear and awe. I don't think we can stop it now. This is bigger than us." As they watched, the bear cub finally closed the distance, stretching its neck to sniff Emma's outstretched hand. For a breathless moment, child and cub regarded each other up close. Two young lives connected by curiosity, by openness, by the absence of learned fear. Then Emma giggled, a sound of pure delight that seemed to startle the cub for only a moment before it made a soft huffing sound in response, almost like laughter. Willow watched from nearby, alert but not interfering, seemingly approving of this new connection forming between her cub and her human. "She's allowing it," Harrison observed in amazement. "She trusts the child with her baby." "And she trusts her baby with the child," Dr. Goodall added. "That's the true miracle here." As they watched this extraordinary scene unfold, a sudden disturbance broke the peaceful moment. The sound of engines approached from the forest road, multiple vehicles moving too fast, too aggressively. Thomas's expression hardened. "Get Emma inside," he told Rose, recognizing the sound of trouble approaching. Harrison was already moving toward his truck, where his radio sat. "I'll call the Rangers." But before anyone could react further, 3 SUVs pulled up at the edge of the property. Dominic Reeves stepped out of the first vehicle, followed by several men carrying cameras and film equipment. Not hunters this time. Something potentially more dangerous. "Well, well," he called, his voice carrying across the clearing. "If it isn't the famous Sullivan family and their pet bear, perfect timing." Dr. Matthews stepped forward. "This is a protected research area. You need to leave immediately." Dominic smiled, a cold expression that didn't reach his eyes. "Actually, I don't. Public road, public forest. And I have every right to film from here." He gestured to the news logo on the side of one vehicle. Channel 9 News is doing a special report on the miracle bear of Whispering Pines, and the dangerous precedent being set by allowing a wild predator to interact with a human child. "Your last hunting expedition failed, so now you're trying a different approach?" Thomas asked, his voice tight with anger. "Just telling the public the truth," Dominic replied smoothly. "That what you're doing is dangerous, irresponsible, and setting a terrible example." He nodded to one of the cameramen, who began filming. "Children across the country could die trying to imitate your daughter." The commotion had caught Willow's attention. She moved protectively closer to Emma and her cub, her posture alert but not aggressive. "Look at that," Dominic said loudly, pointing. "The bear has the child cornered. This is exactly the kind of danger we're talking about. That's not what's happening, and you know it," Thomas growled, stepping forward. "Turn those cameras off and leave our property." "We're not on your property," Dominic countered, "and the public has a right to know what's going on here." As tensions escalated, something unexpected happened. Emma, sensing the hostility in the air, did exactly what she had done months ago when the hunters first mocked her relationship with Willow. She began to cry. Not loud tantrum tears, but quiet, confused weeping that somehow cut through the angry voices. She looked from the strangers with their cameras to her parents, then to Willow, seeking reassurance in a situation she couldn't understand. What happened next would later be viewed millions of times around the world, changing countless hearts and minds in seconds. Willow, hearing Emma's distress, gently moved between the child and the perceived threat. But instead of displaying aggression, she simply sat down beside Emma, creating a furry wall of protection. Then, with exquisite gentleness, she turned and licked the tears from the little girl's cheeks. Emma's crying stopped immediately, replaced by giggles. "Tickles, bear," she exclaimed, completely forgetting her fear. The scene was so tender, so utterly natural, that even Dominic's cameraman lowered his equipment, clearly moved. "Keep filming," Dominic snapped. "This is exactly the kind of anthropomorphizing that makes people forget these are dangerous wild animals." But his words rang hollow as they watched Emma lean trustingly against Willow's side, her tiny hand patting the bear's fur in a gesture of thanks. The bear's posture remained relaxed, her eyes watchful but calm, her body language expressing not possession or threat, but protection. A concept that transcended species. "You can try to twist this however you want," Thomas said quietly, his anger replaced by a sudden clarity. "But people will see the truth. They'll see exactly what we saw the first time Willow approached our daughter. Something miraculous. Something worth protecting." Dr. Goodall stepped forward, her presence commanding immediate respect. "In my 60 years of studying animal behavior, I have witnessed countless examples of interspecies bonding, compassion, and intelligence that defied the narrow definitions we humans impose. What's happening here is extraordinary, yes, but it is not unnatural. It is, perhaps, a reminder of a deeper connection we have forgotten." Dominic faltered, clearly not having expected to confront such a respected authority. Dr. Goodall, I didn't realize you were involved with this situation. I am now, she replied simply. And I believe what the Sullivans have stumbled upon here deserves study and protection, not sensationalism and fear-mongering. As if sensing the shift in the dynamic, Willow's cubs cautiously approached their mother and Emma, creating a tableau that no staged photograph could ever capture. A human child surrounded by a bear family, all of them at ease, connected by something that defied easy explanation. One of the news crew whispered, "Are you getting this? This is incredible." Dominic's face hardened as he realized he was losing control of the narrative. Fine, film it, but make sure to include a warning about the dangers of approaching wild bears. Of course, the cameraman agreed, but his expression made it clear what story the footage was actually telling, one very different from what Dominic had planned. As the unexpected confrontation dissolved into a moment of wonder, Thomas moved to stand beside his daughter and her bear companions. He didn't interfere, didn't try to separate them. Instead, he simply joined them, completing the picture of trust and coexistence that was rewriting the rules of what was possible. Harrison, watching from nearby, shook his head in amazement. A year ago, I would have bet my life savings that scene right there was impossible. A child, 3 bears, and a man, all together like they belong together. Perhaps they do, Dr. Goodall replied softly. Perhaps they're showing us something we've forgotten how to see. Rose joined them, her initial fear replaced by a mother's quiet pride as she watched her daughter fearlessly embrace a different way of being in the world. "What happens next?" she asked, voicing the question that hung in the air. "Where does this incredible journey lead?" Dr. Goodall smiled, her eyes never leaving the scene before them. "I don't know. And that's what makes it so wonderful. We're witnessing something new being born, a relationship, an understanding, perhaps even a way forward." As the spring sun warmed the clearing, Emma Sullivan, barely more than a baby herself, sat surrounded by creatures that most humans feared, her face alight with joy and trust. She had no concept of the boundaries she was crossing, the precedents she was setting, the hearts she was changing. She knew only that she loved her bear, and her bear loved her back. And sometimes, that simplest of truths is the most revolutionary of all. Summer blazed across Whispering Pines Forest, bringing with it a steady stream of visitors to what was now officially known as the Sullivan Wildlife Sanctuary. The footage captured during Dominic's failed exposé had indeed gone viral, but not in the way he had intended. Instead of frightening viewers, the image of Willow gently comforting a crying Emma had touched millions of hearts worldwide. The sanctuary had grown, funded by donations and grants from conservation organizations eager to support this unprecedented research opportunity. The original cabin remained the Sullivan family's private home, while a new visitor center welcomed researchers, documentary crews, and carefully vetted tour groups. Emma, now approaching her 2nd birthday, had become something of a reluctant celebrity, though Thomas and Rose strictly limited her public appearances and fiercely protected her privacy. To her, the sanctuary was simply home, and Willow and her cubs were simply friends, an ordinary part of an extraordinary childhood. On this particular morning, as sunshine filtered through the pines, the sanctuary was hosting a special group of visitors. 20 children from the pediatric oncology ward of the regional hospital had been brought to witness the miracle bear and her human friend. These children, fighting battles too heavy for their young shoulders, sat in a semicircle on the grass, their faces alight with wonder as Emma, under her parents' watchful eyes, demonstrated how she and Willow had learned to communicate. Gentle hands, Emma explained seriously, showing how she approached the massive bear. At 23 months old, her vocabulary had exploded, though her sentences remained charmingly simple. No grabbing, no shouting. Willow, now accustomed to these educational sessions, lay nearby, relaxed but alert. Her cubs, nearly adolescent now, watched from a respectful distance, still more wary of strangers than their mother. One little girl, her head wrapped in a colorful scarf that couldn't quite hide the effects of chemotherapy, raised a thin hand. "Aren't you scared?" she asked Emma. "The bear is so big." Emma considered this question with the gravity of a child who took all questions seriously. "Willow is my friend," she answered finally. "Friends not scary." The simplicity of her answer brought tears to the eyes of the adults present. Dr. Matthews, who had been documenting these interactions for months, scribbled another note in her ever-present journal. Thomas stepped forward. "Emma trusts Willow because they've grown up together in a way, but it's important to remember that most bears are not like Willow. Most wild animals need to be given space and respect." "That's right," added Ranger Collins, who had become a regular presence at the sanctuary. "What you're seeing here is very special. In the wild, we always want to admire bears from a safe distance." The children nodded solemnly, but their eyes remained fixed on Emma and Willow with undisguised longing. For these children, whose lives were filled with needles and tests and sterile hospital rooms, the sight of a little girl and her bear friend represented a kind of freedom and magic they desperately craved. Emma, sensing their wistfulness, did something unexpected. She turned to her parents with a questioning look. "They touch Willow? Little bit?" Rose and Thomas exchanged glances. This wasn't part of the planned visit. Physical contact with Willow had been strictly limited to sanctuary staff and the Sullivan family. "I don't know, sweetheart," Rose began carefully. But Emma was already turning to Willow, placing her small hand on the bear's massive head in a gesture that had become their special form of communication. She whispered something that only Willow could hear. The bear huffed softly, then, to everyone's amazement, deliberately lowered herself to the ground, stretching out in a position that made her appear less intimidating. "She says okay," Emma announced, with the absolute confidence of a child who believed in her connection with the animal. "One at a time. Very gentle." Dr. Matthews inhaled sharply. "She's interpreting Willow's body language. This is remarkable, the level of communication they've developed." Thomas hesitated, torn between caution and the pleading looks on the children's faces. He consulted quietly with Ranger Collins and Dr. Matthews before making a decision. "All right," he agreed, addressing the children and their caretakers. "Those who want to may approach Willow, one at a time, with Emma and me right beside you. Just a brief touch, very gentle, like petting a cat." What followed was a moment of pure magic. One by one, the children approached, some boldly, others with hesitant steps. Each placed a small hand on Willow's fur, guided by Emma, who demonstrated the exact spot where the bear liked to be touched. "Like this," she instructed seriously. "Soft hands." Willow remained perfectly still, her intelligent eyes watching each child with what could only be described as gentle tolerance. When a boy in a wheelchair approached, unable to reach down to where Willow lay, the bear did something astonishing. She raised her head slightly, meeting his hand halfway. The hospital staff watched with tears streaming down their faces. For many of these children, this moment, touching a creature of such power and majesty, connecting with a being so different from themselves, represented a kind of healing that no medicine could provide. "This is why we created the sanctuary," Rose whispered to Harrison, who had arrived to help with the visit. Not just to protect Willow and study her, but for moments like this. Harrison nodded, his own eyes suspiciously bright. Never thought I'd see the day when I'd be helping kids pet a bear instead of teaching them to fear one. When the last child had taken their turn, Emma did something that hadn't been planned. She turned to Willow and solemnly presented the bear with a small collection of pine cones and smooth stones that the children had brought as gifts. "From friends," she explained to Willow. "Say thank you." To everyone's amazement, Willow gently took one of the pine cones in her mouth, then set it carefully among her own collection of treasures that she kept near her favorite resting spot. The gesture, so deliberate and thoughtful, left even the skeptical scientists speechless. As the children reluctantly prepared to leave, the little girl in the colorful scarf approached Rose. "Is Emma special?" she asked. "Is that why the bear loves her?" Rose knelt to meet the child's eyes. "Emma is special, just like you're special. But what makes her relationship with Willow work isn't magic. It's patience and kindness and respect. Emma never tried to make Willow be something she isn't. She just offered friendship and let Willow decide." The girl considered this, then nodded with surprising wisdom. "Like people. You can't make them be your friend. You just be nice and wait." "Exactly like that," Rose agreed, her heart